The carnival came to town, and Dan Klein came alone. His best friend Mike Nelson was on a date with Candy Delaney. Candy had planned for her sister Shannon to be Dan's date, but Shannon backed out at the last minute and found herself some company for that evening. Dan was disappointed because he had a secret crush on Shannon, whom he had known most of his life. They all went to the same schools, although Shannon was always 2 grades older. She was very sweet and had a fantastic personality. She was the it girl of her class, or the alpha girl. She was a stereotype on her feet, blonde, beautiful, curvy, a cheerleader who acted as if she didn't realize her popularity and beauty. Dan, Mike, and Candy had just graduated from high school and were in the final stages of preparing for college. Candy went to Northern Illinois in DeKalb, and Dan and Mike went to the University of Illinois at Chicago. They lived in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and UH was just a drive away. NIU was a little further away, and Candy stayed on campus. Shannon was already studying at NIU and was 2 years older than Candy. At the carnival, Dan kept an eye out for an opportunity to get away from Mike and Candy. He didn't want to be out of place and felt uncomfortable. He could not imagine that he would soon get his chance. They were queuing for ride tickets when Dan saw Shannon running with Steve Rouse chasing after her. Dan shouted to Mike, "Follow me," as he chased after them. They found themselves behind a tent, out of public view. When he caught up with them, Shannon was sitting on the ground, holding her ankle and crying. Steve was leaning over her and yelling at her when Dan grabbed him and pulled him back, causing his attacker to fall. Steve stood up and punched Dan, hitting him right in the nose. Dan looked around and saw that he was alone. Mike didn't follow him when he gave chase. Steve and Dan were about the same size, but Steve was stronger and a few years older. Dan struck, but missed his opponent's face and lost his balance. Steve pushed the falling Dan into the dirt and continued to kick him in the kidneys. At that moment, fortunately for Dan, a policeman drove by on a golf cart, forcing Steve to run away. Shannon crawled over to him and checked how badly he was hurt. "I won?" Dan asked with a smile, sitting in the dirt. "No, I would say it's a draw," Shannon replied. "How's your ankle?" "Looks like it's broken. I can't step on it." Dan stood up and looked around. He saw that they were close to the medical tent and said, "Come on, I'll help you get to the aid station." "Fine." He picked her up, and when she tried to lean on him, she almost fell. "Let's do this the easy way," he said, and picked her up. He carried her about 100 meters to the medical tent. There was a cop dealing with a drunk and a paramedic waiting to work. "What happened to you?" asked the officer. Dan recognized him as his parents' friend, Frank Brady. The paramedic helped Shannon onto the table and began examining her ankle while Dan and the officer talked. Mr. Sorfe Brady, her boyfriend, attacked her, and she injured her ankle running away from him. I tried to play the role of the White Knight and help her, but I was lucky that he escaped. "What started all this?" the officer asked Shannon. "He got angry because I didn't want to." She hesitated, not wanting to say the words. "Everything is fine." "I need to know," he told her. I refused to satisfy him on the Ferris wheel. He drank and became aggressive. When we left the ride, he pulled me aside and told me that I would do it voluntarily or forcefully. I never agreed, so I hit him and ran away. I fell behind the tents, and then Dan appeared out of nowhere with Steve yelling at me. I thought he was going to hit me. That's what I thought. I pulled him away, and he attacked me. He punched me, then pushed me to the ground and kicked me when I missed in response, Dan added. "Who is this guy?" asked the officer. "Steve Rouse," she said. "Fine. Since you were hurt, I need to make a report. You'll both have to testify." "How serious is this, Johnny?" the officer asked the medic. "I don't think it's broken, but she still needs an X-ray. The tumor is strong, so you need to apply ice first," the doctor answered. "Okay, check Lancelot to make sure his nose isn't broken," the officer said, turning to Dan. Shannon was taken to hospital by ambulance while Dan's wounds were examined. He texted Candy to come to the medical tent so he could tell her what happened and so she could call her parents. As he was leaving the tent, Mike and Candy approached from the parking lot. "What's happened?" Candy asked. "Your sister tried to run away from her boyfriend, and I intervened. She ended up in the hospital with an injured ankle, and her boyfriend ran away," Dan said. "Oh my God," Mike said. "Yes, idiot. I told you to follow me when I ran after her." "What the hell happened?" Dan asked. "I didn't hear you." "Sorry," Mike replied. "Come on, I'm lucky." "He was about to trample me," Dan said. "I need to go to the hospital. My parents will meet me there. Can you give me a ride?" Candy asked after she finished talking on the phone. "Yes, of course," Mike answered and took her hand as they walked to his car. "See you later," Dan said as they left. A couple of weeks later, Dan and Mike were relaxing by Dan's pool when Dan asked, "How's it going with Candy?" "Nothing special. We dated a couple of times, but we didn't work out as a couple." "Understood. One way or another, she will soon leave to study." "Yes, her dad rented an apartment there for her and Shannon. They may have already left." "Ah," Dan said regretfully. He never found out how Shannon was doing. Since Steve didn't hit her, he only got off lightly for fighting with Dan. Steve went to Alabama to study and returned there early. Dan was glad he wouldn't see him again. The school year passed without much event, and during the Christmas holidays, Dan happened to meet Candy at the mall. "Hello, Candy. How are you?" he asked. "Fine. Just buying last-minute gifts. And how are you?" "The same. How are your studies?" "It's hard, but it's good. Shannon helps a lot. We're both studying to be accountants, so she can help me with my classes since she's already taken them." "This is good. How is she feeling? How's your ankle?" "Oh, it's already healed." "Is she in town?" he asked hopefully. "No. She returned to the guy she dated at university and went home with him for the holidays." "Oh," Dan said with disappointment, and Candy noticed it. "Dan, maybe we can have lunch together." "Yes, sure. How about Maggiano's?" "Great. I'll give you a ride." "My sister likes you, huh?" Candy said as they waited for a table. "Probably," he answered shyly. "She is older than us. You don't stand a chance, you know." "I didn't even think it was possible. Anyway, I'm here with you now, not her." She smiled when he said that. Dan continued, "When are you coming back?" "The 7th. Classes don't start soon, but I'd like to get settled in already." "I see. It makes sense. You know, it's only a little over an hour's drive from here." Dan was surprised by this unsolicited comment from her. Is she really interested in him and says it's not that far off to meet him during the school year? "Are you home on weekends?" "I would come if there was a reason," she said with a smile when they were called to the table. The dinner went great. They communicated easily without any awkwardness. Dan started to become attracted to her, and he felt like she was flirting with him. Dan insisted on paying for lunch, and as he paid, he asked, "Do you want to go to the movies tomorrow night?" She thought for a moment and said, "I have a date with Mike, sorry. It's more for the company. We didn't really get along when we met in the summer. I'll cancel and we can go." "No, don't. We can go another time," he said. He didn't want to get into a love triangle with his friend and Candy. He realized that he needed to talk to Mike, because there must be some interest if he was dating her again. When she dropped him off at his car, he said goodbye and received a kiss on the cheek. She said, "Please call me, Dan. I'd like to see you again." "Of course I'll see you." "So are you dating Candy again?" Dan asked his friend. "Yes, she's beautiful." "I see, but you said it didn't work out for you." "We don't have to match if I can get her into bed. Last time it almost worked, but my parents came home and ruined everything. After that, she left for university. How did you find out about this?" I met her by chance in a shopping center. We had lunch, and I invited her over tomorrow. She said she had a meeting with you. I didn't know you were interested. It's just one date. You can try later. I don't fall in love or anything like that. Come on. Just a one-time pleasure, eh? Hey, man, if she's ready and willing, I'm ready too. Dan went to the cinema with his little sister Angie and a couple of her friends. As they waited for the movie to start, he saw Mike and Candy sitting 2 rows ahead of them. Angie said, "What's wrong, brother? Do you like this girl?" "What? You look sad and you're looking at Mike's date." "I like her a little. I asked her out tonight, but she already had a date with him. She said she didn't really like him and wanted to cancel, but I told her not to." "That was stupid," she said as Mike and Candy started kissing. "Well, she seems a little interested," Angie said. "Yes, probably." The movie was good, but Mike and Candy didn't notice. They kissed throughout the entire movie. When the movie ended and they got up to leave, Candy noticed Dan looking at her. She frowned and looked embarrassed, but didn't say anything. Mike saw him and winked at him behind Candy's back. Angie said, "Well, at least you have an advantage over him today." "How did you understand this?" "You have 3 beautiful girls with you today. He only has her." The other girls laughed at this. Dan laughed and said, "As tempting as it may sound, sis, having a foursome with 16-year-olds is not my thing." One of her friends said, "It's a shame." They all laughed as they left the cinema. Dan didn't call Candy again for the rest of the holidays. He didn't want to get involved between her and Mike, especially after Mike told him that they had met and that he was going to continue seeing her during the holidays. The day Candy was leaving to go back to university, she called him. "Dan, why didn't you call me?" "First of all, you lied to me about your interest in Mike." "I didn't lie. The way you kissed him in the cinema says otherwise. Certainly the sex you had when you returned to his house speaks volumes about it." "Did this idiot tell you everything?" "Yes, he knew I wanted to ask you out. He probably told me this as a warning to not interfere or stay away from a girl who is easy to approach when she is not interested in the guy. I'm glad he did it, especially since you saw him all the time during the holidays. That's a lot for someone you don't have a good relationship with." "Dan, this." "No, you don't need to explain. We have not met. You were free to see whoever you wanted." "Dan, I really love you. Can we go on a date? It's not what you think." "No, I don't think that's a good idea. I loved you too, but either you lied to me about your feelings for Mike, or you're too fast for me, if you know what I mean." "Are you calling me easy to get?" "Not at all. I'm just not looking for casual connections. I do not do it." She choked, holding back tears. "Listen, I need to go. Have a safe trip back to university. Say hi to Shannon." She ended the call without a word. Dan regretted the conversation. He knew he shouldn't have said what he said, but her action hurt him. The next day, he received a message from an unknown number. "My sister is an idiot, Lancelot." He realized it could only be Shannon and replied, "No, just the wrong sister." He immediately regretted sending this message. He didn't need Shannon to know he loved her while she was dating someone. Her response was a simple sad emoji. Dan and Mike were having lunch at the mall during spring break when Shannon and Candy approached them. Mike didn't have time to react before Candy hit him so hard she thought she broke her arm. "You lying bastard. Did you tell him that I satisfied you and had sex with you? You knew I liked him, you bastard. You even lied to him about seeing me during the holidays." "I met you once, idiot." Dan was shocked. He saw Shannon standing behind her, nodding as if to confirm her words. He looked at Mike, who didn't say a word. "Mike," Dan said. "Look, I wanted a fair chance with her. I knew you wouldn't interfere if you thought she was an easy target. I told you this so I could have a chance before you got together with her. Dude, you're my best friend. Why did you do this to me?" "Oh, forget about it. Yes, I'm your friend. It's brothers first. Man, I thought you'd just find someone else. It doesn't really matter that she marries one of us. God, you're an asshole, Candy said, turning and walking away. Shannon said, call her. Dan, you still have a chance. She loves you. I hear about this all the time at university. Okay, dude, I need you out of my sight. Now I want to kill you, Dan said, getting up and leaving. Mike just shook his head in disbelief. Dan called Candy, but it went to voicemail. He left a message. I'm sorry I was so rude the last time we spoke. Why didn't you tell me he was lying? You probably thought I would trust my best friend over you. Anyway, call me back. She didn't call back, but a week after they returned to university, Shannon texted him, don't give up. She still talks about you a lot. Dan replied, is she dating someone at university? No, Shannon replied. Okay, thank you. Dan called her several more times over the following weeks, but she never returned his calls. One Saturday morning, he decided to go to DeKalb and see her. What is your address? Dan Shannon wrote, I want to send her flowers. Oh, I hope this works, she replied and sent the address. He easily found the apartment and saw her car parked on the street. He bought flowers and a stuffed animal for her, hoping she would talk to him. Shannon was studying and Candy was preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Candy asked. Shannon, assuming they were flowers, said, probably for you. Suspecting nothing, Candy opened the door and saw Dan with flowers. Dan, what are you doing here? Shannon looked up and smiled. I'll leave you alone. Dan said, can I come in? She accepted the flowers and the bear and said, of course, in the kitchen. He sat down while she finished making the salad. He had hoped for a warmer welcome, but at least she let him in. Candy, he began, why don't you answer my calls, even to tell me to leave you alone? I don't know. I'm pretty mad at you for calling me easy, especially when I didn't sleep with him. I was rude, but I didn't call you that. I just meant that I'm not looking for casual relationships. If we date, I want it to be long-term, not a short vacation fling. It's a shame, Dan, because I really thought we'd work out something. And me too. That's why I'm trying now. Yes. Why is this? I didn't show any interest. Well, your sister is working behind my back. She told me to keep trying. She laughed and said, I guess I can't even trust my own sister. Can we go to the cinema on Friday? I'd really like to invite you. Okay, you win. Are you sure you want a long-distance relationship? She said, smiling. It's only an hour's drive. I think you're worth it. Before she could respond, Shannon walked in. So you guys are finally together? Yes. Thank you for telling him not to give up, Candy said. Hey, I'm just tired of you constantly complaining to me about him, Shannon said. Bitch, Candy said jokingly. They started dating and everything went fine for several months. They spent most of their time together during the summer holidays when they weren't working. They were supposed to go to the movies one Friday when Candy insisted on driving. He noticed that she was not driving towards the cinema and asked, where are we going? Watch a movie. Where? In my house. Why? Because my sister is with my parents, and I want to move on to the next stage of our relationship. He smiled and said, I like the way you think. As soon as they entered her apartment, she immediately pulled him into the bedroom. They kissed and caressed each other for several minutes until he lowered her onto the bed. She took the initiative into her own hands and began to undress him. A few minutes later, they were having sex. He lay on his back as she snuggled into his chest. Was I good? He asked quietly. You were amazing. I really think so. It was my first time. Dan, I had no idea. I would come up with something to make it special for you. Well, it's not customary to brag about this. Believe me, it was really special. I love you, Candy. I love you too. Life went on as usual for the next couple of years. They dated and eventually became engaged, planning a wedding after graduation. Shannon married her boyfriend the summer before Dan and Candy's senior year. They settled in the same city where they all grew up. Dan and Mike remained best friends. There was a bit of tension after the fight, but they got over it. Candy even became close to him after everything, which surprised Dan. But Mike became the best man at the wedding. A week after graduating from university, Dan and Candy moved in together. Both found jobs in their hometown and moved into an apartment about a mile from Shannon and her husband, Aaron. One boring Tuesday evening, the intercom rang at their door. Dan pressed the button and asked, "Who's there?" "This is Shannon. Help me, please." Before he could answer, he ran out of the apartment and went down the stairs. "Shannon, oh my God," he said as he opened the bottom door to see her with a split lip and a swollen cheek as she held her left hand. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing disappointingly. Candy came over and hugged her. "What the hell happened, sister?" "I caught him with someone else and tried to kick him out. He just laughed at me, so I started hitting him in the chest. He tried to stop me and pushed me away, and I lost my balance and fell down the stairs." Candy hugged her even tighter, then said, "We need to take you to the emergency room. That arm looks broken." "It's not his fault. I started hitting him," Shannon said through tears. "Okay, we'll take care of that later. Dan, please get the car." "Dan, where is he?" "He was here a minute ago," Shannon said through tears. "Damn, I hope he didn't go to your house." "Lancelot, no," Shannon whispered to herself as Candy said, "Wait here, I'll get the keys." "I'm going to kill that bastard," Dan muttered to himself as he drove to Shannon's house. He parked and ran into the house. The door was unlocked, so he opened it and entered. "It's good to have you back, bitch," a voice shouted from the top floor. Dan quietly walked up the stairs, hoping for an element of surprise. However, he was out of luck. "Oh, it's you. What do you want?" A little princess came and started lying. "She fell. I didn't hit her." Dan didn't say a word. He entered the bedroom and hit Aaron as hard as he could. If this were a movie, Aaron would have passed out. But in real life, everything was different. Aaron fell onto the bed, but immediately jumped up and rushed at Dan. They rolled around the room, punching and kicking each other, until Dan knocked the wind out of him with a punch to the stomach. Dan stood up and kicked him in the back, remembering how it stopped him in the fight with Steve. Ironic, he thought, realizing that all his fights were because of Shannon. Candy ran into the room and screamed at Dan to stop. Dan, shocked by the sight of his wife, turned around and saw her crying. "He's not worth it. Don't get in trouble for him," she said. "Fuck you, bitch. You didn't say I wasn't worth it when I was inside you last night," Aaron said. "No," she screamed. "He's lying. Dear, don't listen to him." "Yeah, bitch. Then listen for yourself," Aaron said, handing Dan his phone. Candy tried to snatch the phone, but Dan, in shock, held it. She fell to the floor crying and said, "No, don't look. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Shannon came in and asked, "What's going on?" still holding your hand. "Let's get you to the hospital. We can figure it out on the way," Dan said. "No, honey, wait," Candy shouted. Dan ignored her and helped Shannon out of the house. "Dan, tell me what happened there," Shannon asked. "Your husband said he slept with Candy last night. I was late at work and went out for a drink, so I don't know if she was home or not. I found panties that weren't mine under the bed this evening. That's how I caught it. I don't know if it was her or not. I was at Mom and Dad's. He gave me his phone number and said there was evidence there. I haven't looked yet. I'm afraid to find out. What if it's true?" he said, starting to cry. "I love her so much." "Dan, those panties I found were a red lace thong. She has these. Let's wait until we drop you off. Then we'll look at the phone together." Fine. Dan held the phone in his hand, waiting for news about Shannon. He tried to open the phone, but it was password protected. The nurse came out and called his name. "You can come in," she said. As he stood up, he saw Candy running towards the entrance. He shook his head and followed the nurse. "Wow, it looks like you lost the fight," Dan said to Shannon, walking over to her bed. "How many steps did you manage to hit with your face?" he joked, making her laugh a little. She had a splint on her arm and her face was covered in bruises. "They said it was broken. They'll take an X-ray tonight and put a cast on tomorrow, I guess." "Did you look at the phone?" "I just can't believe she would do that." He had to lie. "It's password protected. I couldn't get in." "Try 117.711. He entered, "I'm inside." He opened the Messages app and found a recent conversation with the initials CD. He assumed it was Candy and opened the correspondence. There were only 4 messages. Dan assumed they were being deleted regularly. CD, "He won't be home after work." Erin, "She went to her parents." CD, "I'm heading out now. Get ready." Erin, "I'm always ready for you." Dan's tears flowed as he read, "Your parents." It could only be her. He clicked on the CD icon to check the contact information. It was Candy's number. He handed the phone to Shannon and sank into a chair, lost in thought. Shannon started scrolling through his photos and found several videos of Erin having sex. There appeared to be 2 different women, but one was definitely Candy. "Damn, there's a video here," she said as she sent it to herself and Dan. "There are 4 videos, but only one with Candy. I don't know this other woman." She cried, "How could she do this to us? My sister? My husband? I don't know. I'm sorry, Shannon. I never suspected anything. This is so unexpected that I'm shocked. I had no reason to think that she was cheating on me. If it was just this one time, would you be able to stay with her? Honestly, if it were anyone else, not your husband, maybe, but betrayal against you is unforgivable." She put down the phone and took his hand. "I love you, Lancelot." "And I you too, but why do you call me Lancelot?" "Remember when Steve was chasing me and you came to the rescue?" He nodded. "In the tent, the policeman called you Lancelot when you said you were trying to be a white knight. You're always there when I need help. You're my knight in shining armor. My Lancelot." Laughing, Dan said, "I forgot about that. Well, Lady Guinevere, do you want me to call your parents?" "Yes. I'll have to stay with them when I get discharged from here." "Okay, I'll call them." As he made the call, police arrived to speak with Shannon. The hospital has a policy of calling the police if family or child abuse is suspected. The decision to talk to them or not was left to the patient. Dan went out into the lobby to make a call. He found a place where Candy couldn't see him, but he could see her if he looked around the corner. She sat in the corner, crying, and looked at the main door to the emergency room. He still couldn't believe she did it. His shock turned to anger. He called her parents and said, "Hi, this is Dan." "Hello, Dan. What's happened?" "Shannon had a fight with Erin and is now in the emergency room." "What?" Her father shouted. "Is she all right?" "She fell down the stairs after he pushed her. She has severe bruises and a broken arm. She's in room 112A. I'll kill this bastard. I managed to take revenge on him. Look, it's worse than you think." "How can it be worse?" "He had an affair with Candy." "What? My Candy?" "Yeah, that bastard filmed it and let me watch it." "Jesus, where is she now?" "In the emergency room waiting room. They were told not to let her in here." "Okay, we're on our way." "Fine. I'll stay with Shannon until you arrive. She is now talking to the police. I don't know if she'll end up filing a complaint, but before she found out it was Candy, she said it wasn't his fault. Now that she knows who she is, she can take it out on him and file a complaint. Honestly, I would send him to jail." I agree with you. Dan, I'll see you soon. Dan walked past the police on his way back to the ward. They stopped him and asked if he had seen anything. He answered in the negative, and they passed by. He didn't want them to know about his fight with Erin. Hey, your parents are on their way. Are you okay? Yes. They will arrive soon and take me for an x-ray. How did it go with the police? I told them everything. He pushed me to stop hitting him, and I fell. They will arrest him. Great. He was overconfident about all this. How could I be so wrong about him? Dan, don't worry about it. I'm filing for divorce. That's right. You deserve better. She didn't answer and smiled at him tightly. When the orderlies took her away, Dan returned to the waiting room. Looking around the corner, he saw Candy and her parents engaged in a lively conversation. Dan took his phone out of his pocket and sent the video Erin took to Candy. He watched as her phone beeped as a notification. She opened it and saw the video. Screaming, she fell into a nearby chair, dropping her phone. Her mother picked it up and looked at what was on it. She then threw the phone back into Candy's lap and walked away, shaking her head. She saw Dan peeking around the corner and grabbed her husband's hand. They headed to Dan's place and made sure Candy couldn't see them as they turned the corner. What a mess, Dan. We're so sorry, her father said. I decided to call off the wedding. I can't marry a woman who cheats on me, firstly, and betrays her family. Secondly, this is just crazy. Did she tell you why? Not yet. I didn't pick up her calls. She said it was all a lie, right before you sent her the video. That's what I thought. Lie until my last breath. How's Candy? She's being x-rayed now. I'm going to leave here while Candy is still sitting here. I'll grab the essentials and go to my parents. Good idea. Best to avoid it until you calm down. Dan entered the apartment and felt a wave of sadness. He packed his things, ignoring calls on his phone. He saw a stack of wedding invitations and tore one into pieces. He left the rest on her pillow. Candy sat in the waiting room and wondered how things got so confusing. Why did Erin write them down? Why didn't he tell her? Why did he give this video to Dan? How could she be so stupid? Then she saw a policeman coming around the corner. She approached him and asked, "Officer, is it a crime to record me having sex without my knowledge?" Well, I guess it depends on what they do with the video. Laws against retaliation prohibit it from being posted online or shared on social media. There are also laws against blackmail and things like that. What happened? The man I had sex with recorded it on his phone without my knowledge. He gave the phone to my fiancée so he could see it. Illinois has not yet passed a law that addresses this case. You should contact an attorney to see if you can file a civil lawsuit against him. I'm sorry. I hope everything works out, the officer said sincerely as he walked away. Candy saw the doors open and her parents came out with Shannon. She approached them, but her father said, "Haven't you done enough? Leave her alone." "But Dad, please. Don't make a scene, Candy. Just go home." "Where's Dan?" "He left an hour ago." "Damn, he should be home," she said and ran to her car to go home. As her parents turned onto Shannon Street, they saw a police car drive by with Erin inside. Shannon shook her head sadly at the state of her life. They packed a bag with her clothes, and Shannon took the red underwear that would cause the collapse of her marriage and later her relationship with her sister. "Mom, these are Candy's things. Can you make sure she gets them? I want them out of my house." "Don't be rude. Just throw them away." Candy ran into her apartment and screamed for Dan. She ran from room to room, finding everything empty, and eventually ended up in her bedroom. She sat down on the bed and cried. A few minutes later, she laid her head on the pillow and found the torn invitation. She cried even harder and called Dan again. He didn't answer. The next day, Dan realized he hadn't watched the video. Shannon confirmed it was Candy, but Dan needed to see for himself. He decided to look for photos first to see if it happened more than once. There were naked women in the photographs, but it wasn't Candy. He found photos of Shannon, but closed them, not wanting to violate her privacy. He returned to the video and pressed play. He saw Aaron say he had received a text from Shannon and put the phone on the nightstand. Dan realized that Candy probably didn't even know she was being recorded, and that was Aaron's excuse for handling the phone while they were having sex. It was standard sex. They hardly spoke. There was no ridicule for Dan or Shannon, and sex lasted about 10 minutes. When it was finished, Candy said, "That's it. Are you happy now?" "Yes, you're hot. If Dan or Shannon ain't, I will cut off your dignity." "Easy, honey. It is not necessary. I'm not going to ruin my marriage by giving you away. This is our secret. It's better for him not to find out about Mike either. I told you, I won't tell him. You've kept your part of the deal. I'll do mine. You just need to be more careful if you're going to sleep with him. Walking into a motel in broad daylight is a bad idea. Anyway, I've had enough. It was goodbye sex. I won't cheat when I get married. You have a twisted idea of good and evil, sweetie. No, once I take my wedding vows, I make a commitment. I didn't say vows when we started dating or when we got engaged." "Wow, girl, if you don't think you're doing anything wrong, why would I hide it? He doesn't need to know. That's all that matters. Bye." Then the video stopped and Aaron smiled at the camera. Dan threw the phone at the wall and screamed, "Damn." His mother came running and said, "What, dear? Everything is fine." "No, just found out she slept with Mike too." "Oh, Dan, I'm really sorry." "Yes, me too, Mom, me too." Dan continued to ignore Candy's calls. He had to deal with Mike and didn't want to be informed. I hope Candy didn't watch the whole video and realize he knows. Dan texted Mike, "Meet me tonight, bro. I want to talk about the bachelor party." Mike, "Yes. Bill at 7. Dan, "Perfect." Bill's Pub is a strip mall with parking on the side of the building. It was the perfect place for someone to get robbed. Dan called his high school friend Javi and demanded payment of the favor he was owed. During their sophomore year of high school, Javi and Dan were together outside school one day and saw Javi's girlfriend making out with another guy. Javi beat the crap out of him, and his girlfriend ran away and called the police. Dan told police the other guy threw the first punch after taunting Javi, calling him an asshole and insulting him about taking his girlfriend. As a result, Javi received only a fine and several hours of community service. It was less than the other guy who was considered the instigator. Javi always thanked Dan for keeping him out of juvenile detention and promised to repay that favor someday. This day came. Dan was sitting in the parking lot and saw Mike drive up. As soon as Mike got out of the car, he was grabbed by one of the two masked men waiting. The second guy grabbed Mike by the wallet and punched him several times in the stomach and face. Then, as a final act of revenge, he hit him between the legs. As Mike curled up on the ground, Dan ran up and yelled at them. The attackers ran away, and Dan helped Mike. "Are you all right? What the hell did this all mean?" "They took my wallet." "Crap. Do you need an ambulance?" "No, just call the police." Dan called the police, and they filed the necessary robbery report. Dan finally got tired of Candy calling him and answered the call later that night. "Hello." "Dan, baby, it's not what you think." He interrupted her and said, "How long have you been sleeping with Mike?" "Dan, that's not true. That's crazy." "Watch the video. We're done. I'll take my shit and you can keep the apartment." "No, Dan, wait." She told the dead connection. Candy watched the video with horror, seeing that it also included their post-coital conversation. She started crying again. She then realized that he had evidence that he was blackmailing her. "Let's see what the cops think about this," she told the empty room. Dan went to Delaney's house to check on Shannon. Mom let him in and hugged him. Once again, I apologize for Candy's actions and thank him again for helping Shannon. He walked over to Shannon's old bedroom, where she was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He noticed the fresh cast on her arm and asked, "Can I be the first to sign this?" She jumped up and hugged him, sobbing into his chest. "Why, Dan? How could she do this to us?" "Today I watched all the videos. They talk about it. He blackmailed her. He caught her at a motel with Mike." "Mike? My God." "Yes, I just can't understand it. Were they sleeping with each other from the start? Was that scene at the mall when she hit him staged? I just don't know what to think." "Did you talk to her?" "Briefly. All it takes is for her to lie to me and for me to tell her it's over." "What are you going to do, Shannon?" "Now that I'm done with the doctors, I'm going to see a divorce lawyer. The cheating was bad enough, but finding out that he blackmailed her, it's too much. Not to mention the fact that he pushed me down the stairs. Now I can believe I blamed myself at first. Everything will be fine. He'll get what he deserves. Did you hear that Mike got beaten up and robbed at Bill's tonight?" "No, but let him have it for messing with Candy. Karma is a bastard." He smiled and agreed. "What's next for you, Dan?" "Obviously, we're done. I feel bad for your parents because they paid some deposits for the wedding. We're not getting them back. I guess I'll go back home and start over. Stay in touch, Dan. We can support each other. I'll definitely need it. Of course, I'll need someone to lean on too. God, what a waste of time and love. Thank God we haven't gotten married yet. I'm sorry I ever told you to keep trying with her. It's okay. I've always been one for compromise. My first choice was taken." Her eyes lit up and she smiled at the comment. He hugged her again and went downstairs. Her parents were talking in the kitchen when he entered. "Mr. and Mrs. Delaney, I'm sorry about the wedding. I'll reimburse you for the deposits." "So this is it, the final decision?" "Yeah, turns out she was involved with my best friend too." Her mother cried and her father said, "Don't worry about the money. She'll give it back to us. She was a bastard." "Gary," her mother exclaimed. "Sorry, you are wonderful people. I have been happy to be a part of your family these past few years." A tear rolled down his cheek as he hugged them goodbye. "Who knows what the future holds, Dan?" "We'll see, Mrs. Delaney. Take care of yourself." A week later, Dan arrived at his old apartment to pick up his things. He waited until Candy left for work, then packed and loaded everything into the rented van. He closed the door and stood up to take one last look. He was sad to think about what was lost. Love, passion, children they wouldn't have. It hurt him greatly. He left the key on the kitchen table and closed the door forever. As he was returning to his parents' house, he received a call from Mike. They haven't spoken since that night at Bill's bar. "What?" he shouted into the loudspeaker. "Dan, listen, it was all a lie. I never slept with Candy. Are you a moron or just stupid? She was blackmailed because you got caught. She confessed in the video." "Sorry, man. I don't know what to say other than I'm really sorry." "How long?" "What? How long did this take you?" "A little over 2 months. The first time it happened was at Camden's party. You passed out and we were all playing Truth or Dare." "Truth or Dare? You're college graduates, not 8th graders." "We were drunk. Some tasks involved kissing, groping, removing clothes. We all got turned on. Candy and I were the only ones without a partner. When everyone left to have sex with their partners, we were so drunk that we did it too." "Bastard, why did you keep going?" "It wasn't regular, and she always called me when she wanted to." "You were my best friend, bastard. How could you do this to me?" "I've always wanted her, and you know it. I finally got my chance, and she was great in bed. How could I refuse?" "Listen to me carefully. Next time I see you, You will wish that those guys who robbed you would kill you. You are dead on your feet, and when I see you, not if I see you, when I see you, your corpse will not find out." He didn't give him a chance to answer and ended the conversation. He reproached himself for being dramatic. He knew he wasn't a fighter and he hadn't won his last couple of fights, so it was an empty threat. He hoped it would be enough to keep him away. Candy was devastated that her family had cut off all contact with her. She eventually transferred to the Milwaukee office and hoped that one day they would forgive her. She knew Dan would never do this. The betrayal was too deep. Aaron was released on bail, but did not bother Shannon again, partly because of the restraining order, partly because he wanted to get rid of the obsessive bitch, as he called her. He accepted a deal on assault charges for shoving Shannon and blackmailing him. His lawyer tried to acquit him of blackmail, but since it was his phone that was recording and he willingly gave it to Dan, the judge allowed it to be used as evidence. He received 6 months for assault and 1 year for blackmail. His lawyer negotiated the attack as best he could. Shannon's written statement hinted that the fall was almost accidental. However, the push that caused it is not, so he did not escape punishment completely. He returned to his hometown after being released after 12 months for good behavior. Shannon never saw or heard from him again. Dan met Shannon every Saturday for coffee and tea. It was strictly platonic, just two broken hearts hiding in plain sight. 6 weeks later, she canceled the appointment one Saturday morning. She called but left him a voicemail. She cried in the message and said she didn't feel well. Dan didn't call back. He drove to her house, where she was living again after Aaron moved out. A knock on the door caught her by surprise on the couch, surrounded by a pile of used napkins. She was wearing a shabby old robe. She saw him through the window and shuddered. There was no way she could let him see her in this state. She screamed, "Please go away, I'm fine." He shook his head and said through the glass, "No." She cried and said, "Please." He shook his head again. She gave in and opened the door. He entered and, seeing the state of the house, hugged her. "What happened? I'm supposed to be your rock, remember? I am pregnant." "Oh shit." "Yes, oh hell." "Come in, let me calm you down. I'll make you some tea." He went to the kitchen and took out a capsule of green tea for her. She had a Keurig coffee machine that she used for tea. It was easier than heating the kettle. He placed the tea in front of her and began collecting the used napkins, throwing them in the trash. Once everything was settled, he sat down next to her and hugged her. She cried and sobbed in his arms for 10 minutes in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I'm almost 3 months along. With all this stress, I didn't even notice that I missed my period." "Whose child is this?" Dan made a joke and got slapped on the wrist for it. "Asshole, of course he is. I didn't cheat." "Of course not." "What should I do, Dan? I'm terrified. In a few months, I'll be divorced and my baby won't have a name. I've already decided that I'll never tell Aaron about the baby after he was admitted, and I'm scared. I want him in my life." "First thing you do is take a shower. Once you're freshened up, I'll take you to the cafe we've been going to every week for the last month. This isn't the end of the world for you. This is the beginning. You're going to have a baby, a beautiful little part of you that you can nurture and mold into a future president or doctor. I envy you so much. I can't raise a child alone. Shannon, you are a wonderful woman. There is someone out there somewhere waiting for you, I'm sure." "Ha, easy to tell you." She got up to go to the shower. She heard him say quietly to himself as she went upstairs, "I picked the wrong sister." While she was taking a shower, he tidied up the house a little. He cleaned up the mess in the living room and loaded the dishwasher from the overflowing sink. When she came down, she found him wiping the countertops. "Why are you cleaning my house?" "Hey, I'm not cleaning. I'm tidying up." "Okay, let's go." Sitting in a cafe, He ordered black coffee for himself and tea with skim milk for her. She smiled, seeing that he always remembered her order. "What?" he asked, looking at her smiling face. "Nice of you to remember my order. We've been doing this for quite some time." "I know, but if you didn't care, you wouldn't pay attention to the little things." "Of course I care. How many punches do I need to get in the face for you to understand that?" She turned away and wiped away a tear. "Sorry," she said. "I'm just hormonal." "You're pregnant. I guess I should get used to it being the norm now." Changing the subject from hormones, "Have you told your parents?" "No, that scares me too." "You know you have to tell them before it becomes noticeable, right?" "I know. I don't think they'll be angry. They really want to be grandparents. They're just stressed out lately. Both of their daughters have broken up their marriages, although yours hasn't been consummated yet. Do you want me to come with you? Maybe I can switch their emotions." "I can't ask you to do that. It's not your problem." "You didn't ask. I offered, and it's no problem. You're my best friend now. I won't let you go through this alone." "Best friend, huh?" she said, raising an eyebrow. He nodded and said, "Yes, and don't forget about it." Shannon knocked on the door of her parents' house, nervous and hoping that no one would answer. She frowned when her father opened the door. He said, "Hey guys, come in." "Hello, father." "Oh, damn. I'm only dad when things are bad." "Meg, Shannon and Dan are here. She called me daddy." "What happened this time?" asked Mrs. Delaney, half jokingly. "Let's sit down, okay?" "Okay, honey, what happened?" asked her father. "I am pregnant." "What? Dan? Damn it, couldn't you guys have gotten married first?" said her father. Dan was shocked and Shannon said, "Dad, I wish I could." Dan's head spun so quickly that his vision became blurred. "This is Aaron's baby. I haven't even kissed Dan, let alone slept with him," she finished. "Oh, sorry, honey. You're so close that we somehow assumed you were dating," her father said dejectedly. No, sir. We're just helping each other get through our problems as friends. She's still married, after all." "God, is that all that's stopping you?" "Dan, the papers are filed, and it's all over except the crying. And Lord knows how long she's been crying." Dan sat with his mouth open. He couldn't find the words to respond, so her father continued. "Dan, she's in love with you. We can all see it. Hell, we thought you two were already a couple." "Dan," her mom continued, "I see the love in your eyes when you look at her." Dan took Shannon's hand and said, "You didn't want me when we were younger. I didn't think you felt that way about me." "What?" Shannon said. "I loved you from afar for years. Yes, when we were in elementary and middle school, it couldn't work. But after I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I thought I had a chance. Candy even tried to help, and when you refused to let me go to the carnival with Steve, I assumed you weren't interested. I was devastated. Later, she told me that I never had a chance because you were older. You went back to your boyfriend at school." "Oh, Dan. She told me Mike's friend needed a girlfriend. She didn't say it was you. I probably would have said yes, even though you were a couple years younger. You were sweet, and I knew you were a good guy. God, after you saved me from Steve, I was so embarrassed that I just ran back to school. This guy was Aaron. By the way, he convinced me to give him another chance. Our lives seem full of wasted time," Dan said as he leaned down and kissed her. "Well, that's settled," said her father. "Now about my future grandson. How far away are you?" "Almost 3 months. We need to get your house ready. We need to set up the nursery, secure the house for the baby, and go shopping." "Oh boy, we're going to buy a lot," her mom said happily. "Dan, if you are heading where you seem to be heading, will you be able to accept her child from another man?" asked her father. Shannon sighed and said, "Dad, no, this is an important question. I obviously haven't had time to think about it yet. but I don't see a problem, especially since you don't want Aaron in his life. This brought Shannon's first tears of joy in months. I love you, Dan. He kissed her again and said, Darling, I love you even more. Her mother clapped and said, Let's start planning. After a few weeks, although they saw each other several times a week and talked on the phone every day, Dan realized that they had never been on a real date. He immediately sent flowers to her work, and on the card he wrote, Would you like to go to the movies with me on Friday? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he received a message. I was wondering when you would finally ask. He answered as stupidly as only a man could answer a woman. I had to work up the courage to be seen in public with a pregnant woman. As soon as he sent the message, he realized his mistake. She couldn't see his face or understand that it was a joke. He grabbed his coat and ran out of the office. She worked just a few miles away, so he quickly got to her. He walked past the reception desk and approached her booth. She stood with her back to him and did not see him approach. He startled her when he said, It was a joke. She turned around and laughed at him. You came here to say it was a joke. I knew it, you fool. She saw the fear in his eyes and that they were red. Oh God, did you really think I'd be offended? She stood up and hugged him. You're an idiot. I knew you were kidding. Sandy, what did I just do? Sandy, from the next booth, said, She suddenly burst out laughing and showed us the stupidest message we've ever seen. You're either the biggest idiot in the world or the happiest idiot. Dan smiled and said, Definitely the happiest man in the world. He kissed her and said, Well, that's enough drama for today. I'll let you get back to work so you can laugh at me to your heart's content. Dan picked her up on Friday, dressed in his best suit. He had reservations at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and a suit was optional, but it was their first official date. She opened the door and said, Yeah, you look good. He didn't answer right away because he was amazed by her beauty. She was wearing a loose dress due to her rounded belly, but it was short and her legs were covered in the sexiest shade of coffee stockings he had ever seen. Her blonde hair was cut short but framed her face perfectly. She had makeup on, but it was so neat that it looked like she wasn't wearing makeup at all. Her dress was low-cut and showed a little cleavage, just enough to catch his eye. He finally noticed that she was wearing high heels with an ankle strap. He could see the bright red polish on her coffee-colored toenails. Well, she said, I can't figure out what exactly left you speechless. Can I guess? With a smile, he replied, Your pregnant belly. She put her hand over her mouth in shock, but then realized he was joking and said, Okay, ass. You probably liked my feet, pervert. He looked deep into her eyes, lifted her chin with his finger and said, Your legs are so sexy. I really wasn't kidding. Your pregnant belly is beautiful. I love you. She smiled, holding back tears, and said, I love you more. After dinner, he took her home and walked her to the door. She said, You know, if we make love, you won't need to use a condom. He laughed and replied, But I don't know where you've been. She hit him on the shoulder and said, Dan, please come in and make love to me. He leaned over and kissed her. Rising for air, he said, I would die to hear those words from you. She screamed and ran into the house. He chased her to her bedroom, and they shed their clothes. Dan woke up wrapped in the arms of his beloved. He had never felt happier in his life. She woke up shortly after him and smiled when she saw him looking at her. She asked, What are you thinking about, my love? Honestly? Yes, please. I was thinking about how in stories the lover wakes up to the smell of coffee and bacon, and I smell sex and morning breath. She playfully hit him and said, I'll make the coffee and start cooking the bacon. There's an extra toothbrush in the drawer on the left. Thank you, he said, and then kissed her. I love you. I love you too. When the time was right, Dan started going to all of her doctor's appointments and Lamaze classes. Everyone assumed he was the baby's father, and he never bothered to correct them, and neither did Shannon. She was proud that people thought Dan was the father. Dan was driving up to his apartment when he saw Shannon sitting on his porch. "How are you, darling?" he asked. She tossed him an envelope and said, "My divorce is final." "It's great," he said. "What's the matter?" "I don't know. Nothing. I think my failure as a wife is complete. How can you want me? Aaron clearly missed me." Dan realized what was happening. She had been unsure of her slight weight gain for some time. She was also always worried that he would change his mind about her and leave her for a non-pregnant girl who would have her own child. Dan had been waiting for this day for months. He took her hand and led her to his apartment. He opened the door and pulled her inside. "Please sit down. I'll be right back." He went into his bedroom and called, "Mr. Delaney, I'm sorry to do this over the phone, but your daughter received the final divorce papers today. She's a complete mess, sir. I would like your permission to marry her." "Jesus Christ, son. You had it the first time with Candy, and you probably still have it now. Make her an honest woman. Come and show her mother the ring. I'm sure you already bought it." "Yes, sir. Thank you. See you soon." "Hey, baby, can you come here for a minute?" Dan asked. "You make your pregnant girlfriend walk all the way." Dan was on one knee when she entered the room. She froze mid-sentence and began to cry. "Shannon, please make me the happiest person in the world and help me correct our mistakes. Help me stop wasting love and time, and give our child a father. Will you marry me, my love?" "Yes, oh God, yes." "Thank God," he said. She hit him on the shoulder. He kissed her passionately like never before and said, "I've been waiting my whole life for you to tell me this." "God, what a waste of time," she said as she kissed him. End.